Welcome to another broadcast from MindsYourHealthCast.com. As you know, every week we attempt to bring to you some perspectives related to health and sickness and the medical profession and diet and soil and you name it. We've delved into all those areas. We've delved into energetics, energetic medicine, oriental medicine, regular medicine, naturopathic medicine, homeopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. You name it, we've talked about it. There's no end to all the things that are going on and have gone on, and having reviewed the history heavily for the last couple of hundred years, which has been a big project of mine for a while, we've uncovered some very interesting things, and I believe that I've gained a really good perspective of where we were and where we are and how we got to where we are from where we were. And there's just a lot of things that have happened. A lot of people have, or groups of people I should say, have gained power, and in the process of gaining power they've monopolized and in many cases pushed out of the way really meaningful, helpful, healthy things in favor of the most profitable things. And so that's kind of where we've gotten to today. And of course the fact that the pursuit has not been wellness. We have the worst epidemic of chronic illness ever, and we have people who are, their organs are dying or being so totally destroyed that they're having to be transplanted or replaced to keep them alive for a while. And when I was young, we never heard of any of that stuff. It's just interesting to see how it's come about. Now, is that progress? Well, I suppose to someone who's about to die, getting another organ and buying a little more time is progress to that particular person. But my question is, why did they get to that place in the first place? What about modern, scientific, advanced, best medicine in the world has created the sickest, most expensive sick bill in the world? And what has caused one country, i.e. the United States, to consume 50% of all the manufactured pharmaceuticals in the world, and us only representing a very small fraction of that. So, things, they don't make sense. In other words, if we look at outcome versus methodologies, in any other thing except a big money field, there would have been changes. If we were making cars that were falling apart when you drove off of the lot of the dealership, we would be real upset about that, and we would be demanding that something be done to create a better quality car. But, it's for some reason there's this mystique in the health field that says that, well, I don't know anything about it. The doctor, he knows, he's learned, I have to depend on him, and I know that he's going to do the best for me, and I know that the pharmaceuticals are going to do the best to produce products that are going to make me healthier, and I know the government's going to oversee and watch out and make sure that none of this is going to be bad for me. Now that, in theory, sounds very good, and ought to be the philosophy in the background. And when I was real young, I know it's hard to think back that far, that was the case. The people that went into the medical field to help people, and they attempted to do the best they could with the tools they had to help people get and stay healthy. But see, something new has happened, and what's happened is that we have actually engrafted diseases into people's bodies that did not exist before. And at some point we're going to get into that heavier. Bit by bit we're getting there, because in a roundabout way we're giving you more information about the body, how the body works, the things that upset the body, what real medical treatment toward health is. And hopefully out of that you'll begin to ask a lot of questions, not only of yourself but of the people that you go to for treatment and to the people who supposedly regulate the manufacture of all these things that we call drugs, and see that what we're getting is really making people healthier. Well, I know that the fact is that that's not true, and anyone, unless they're totally blind and can't hear, and maybe are in their own psychotic world, are the only people who could think otherwise, because it's so blatantly obvious that the bill goes up tremendously higher than any other field. The elevation of the cost have just outgrown everything else, and it's getting worse because people are sicker and sicker, and the procedures are more and more expensive. And where is the health part of it? We call it health care, but it really isn't health care, it's sick care. And the big money is in sick care, not health care. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we've chosen an interesting topic today in the next broadcast, because it's going to take two. And we hear a lot about it. We hear an awful lot about at least part or maybe both of the issues that kind of work together. They're interlaced, and it's really hard to separate them. In fact, anytime you talk about a human living system, it's hard to separate. This whole idea of the different systems of the body is kind of a forced, artificial boundary line. Medicine has done that because of a philosophy they have called the reductionist materialistic philosophy that says basically man is nothing but a machine, and therefore we can interchange parts and we can manipulate and control various issues either by drugs or other methods. And the people have bought it because it's claimed to be done in the name of science, and everybody wants to be scientific. Nobody wants to be ignorant or backward or something. We want to be out in front. And so it's like this carrot on a string. It's been dangled in front of people for the last couple of hundred years, claiming, hey, we're here, we have the cure, we're going to make you well. But as I say, in actual practice, when you look at it, that's not true. So at any rate, we're going to give you another piece of information. Unfortunately, as I say, we can't present the whole body at one shot. And when we talk about different systems, again, it's artificial in nature, because the human system is, in fact, an intact total system that everything is interacting with everything else. So to think that you can take a spleen out, for example, and it not have a major impact on the whole system, you know, it's to me, it's an erroneous assumption that you're going to be as healthy after you've lost your spleen as you were before. Now, medicine kind of has the attitude, if you can live without it, meaning you can stay alive, you know, you may have some impairments, in fact a lot of impairments every time you remove something that should be there, and you'll never be able to attain totally high-level health if pieces are missing, because everything is there for a purpose. I mean, if you look at the history of mankind, it took thousands and millions of years, in a sense, depending on what you believe, to get to where we are. And nature has a way of refining and making things work the most efficiently for the big picture. Now, keep in mind, we're talking the big picture, because if you get into a piece of the picture, yeah, you can talk a different story. But when you're looking at the big picture, you know, just killing off one species, for example, or even one type of insect at the wrong place can disrupt the whole sequence of things, because all of those, over the thousands and millions of years, have been so finely interwoven to make them all work well together, that anytime you disrupt, maybe not immediately, and see, the human body is the same way, because we're kind of a microcosm of the big picture. In fact, in Chinese medicine, there's something called the concept of the Tao. spelled Tao, and the yin-yang symbol that's white and black, but they're kind of intertwined, and in the core of the white is a black dot, in the core of the black is a white dot, indicating the interconnectedness. And so we are a reflection of this big picture of nature, and inasmuch as the whole of the world was refined over all this period of time, we likewise were refined to fit within this. It's only when man came along thinking he's smarter than nature that has disrupted, that has began things happening. And so the same as in nature, if you disrupt one part of a bigger cycle, which you don't even realize the cycle was there, immediately everything doesn't collapse. But bit by bit, this being off affects this, which affects this, which affects this, and pretty soon you have a whole chain of disturbance, and then you're wondering, well, gee, how did that happen? And it's because back here you disrupted something, and it's true in the human body. The human body, as well as this whole system of nature and the world, is a interacting, balanced system. If left to its own, everything is okay. But and it tries to stay that way. If you disrupt, if at all possible, it will try to recover and get back. And so the same is true with the human system. A disruption today may not immediately stand out as a problem, but over time, this being upset now upsets this, which now upsets this, which now upsets this, which now upsets this, and then all of a sudden we start to get some strange symptoms, and we think, well, how did we get here? Since it's not a part of medical education to look at the big picture, and instead of saying, well, in this hospital room we have a cancer, and in this we have diabetes, and then they're looking at diseases as separate entities that somehow have attacked you, when in fact the disturbance is a disruption in your system that no longer allows it to function as it should. So as I said, as the earlier example, if you take out a spleen, the person may stay alive. Now in some cases they don't. Actually you don't hear too much about that, but many times when the spleen is removed, a person does not survive because it's an integral part of the whole system. And so it's not that you can pull out one piece and say, well, here is this system, like the reproductive system, the hormonal system, the circulatory system, all of these systems that we talk about, and when you study anatomy, physiology, that's the way it's taught, they're not all separate, they're all intertwined. The communication systems within the body all interconnect and communicate and create this whole mass of information exchanges going on that's keeping everything working. And so if you snip a wire, let's say you want a TV, you might be able to snip one wire and it keep having a picture and sound, although the quality may be disrupted, but maybe one wire won't totally shut the thing down. But if you clip the right wire, you may lose all the picture, or you may lose all the sound, or you may have the whole thing shut down, depending on which wire you clip. And so the same thing is true with the human system. If we disrupt somewhere, as I say, it may not be immediately, but somewhere down the road, we're going to get a strange set of symptoms, and we say, well, gee, what caused that? Well, if you don't understand how the body works as a whole unit, as opposed to all these pieces, then you're at a loss. So what do? You try to come up with something that manages this symptom so the person feels better. You haven't solved the problem, you haven't made the person healthier, but you make them feel better because you turn off a symptom. Now, in turning off a symptom, you then have to shut something down, and shutting something down starts an additional cascade of disturbance. Now, I don't know if this all makes sense to you, but I guess I had to stop at this point and get into that because of my subject is hormones, enzymes, and life. And those are two major portions of the function of the body that keep us going, keep us alive and healthy if they are all working right. And so, again, they were divided out as a system. For example, the hormone system, but it's not quite that simple. So if you go back to Chinese medicine, I learned many years ago that they had tremendous insights into the Tao, or the holistic idea that everything is interconnected with everything else. And so we can't separate. We can't separate ourselves from the seasons that occur where we live, and they have effects on us. We cannot separate ourselves from the earth itself, and there's cycles in the earth, and so we are influenced by them. We are energized by the sun, and it has cycles, and so we are affected by those as those cycles shift. And it's important to the Chinese, at least it was, to understand that their concept, the Tao, meant as above, so below. So as the cosmos, the universe, the solar system, the earth system, as those are all intertwined and can't be separated, they're all part of each other. If you pull one body out, it changes the whole energetic configuration, the whole gravitational effects of the system, the big system, and so things are altered. And over time, as I say, it may not be immediately, but over time things are going to happen. So anyhow, I learned a long time ago that each of the major hormone-producing glands in the body, which in medicine is referred to as the endocrine system. An endocrine gland is a tissue grouping that produces a certain messenger chemical that's released into the blood and can travel around the body and affect certain things. Now that's the basic endocrine system of the body. And those messengers are referred to as hormones. And so they all affect certain tissues in certain ways. Now, it's possible to cut one of those out, but whatever those messengers were that it produced, in most cases you're not going to be able to stay alive if you don't substitute from the outside that messenger that has been disrupted. Now, will it work as well? Well, probably not. You know, when we try to copy something from nature, we never can get it totally right. We can make it manageable sometimes. So a person, if their thyroid is either surgically excised or destroyed with radioactive iodine or poisoned with some type of chemical because it seems to be overactive, as opposed to finding out why it's overactive, yeah, you can take a substitute, and probably by continually manipulating the dosage and so forth, you may keep the person functioning reasonably well, but they're never going to be the same. They're now altered, and the synthetic molecule that you have generated to replace the original living molecule synthesized by the body is never going to work exactly right. And so you pay a price for that. And so, as I say, I learned that each organ has a relationship to one of these glands. And so if the organ that's in relationship to that gland is disturbed in some way, then the function of the gland will be affected. And this is something that I think is probably totally foreign to medicine. I studied regular medicine and what they teach, as well as all these other systems. And so they don't see that relationship, nor is it important anyhow, because they would not have a corrective measure or treatment that could be introduced to correct the problem. And of course today, I know, and I'll name those for you, so if you might want to write them down, The major glands related to the major organs are starting with the cycle of energy starts generally in Chinese medicine at 3 a.m. in the morning with the lung energy and cycles through the day back to that 3 a.m. again. And so the lung system has an interrelationship to the thymus, which is a major player in immune function. Okay, and so as you move around from the lung, the next organ in line, which is the five-element concept of Chinese medicine, the next one in line after the lung would be the kidneys. And the kidney energetic has a big relationship to the adrenals. Now, interestingly, medicine recognizes at least a proximity because the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, and so one of the names for the adrenal glands is the suprarenalis glands, meaning above the kidney glands. And so those two are very powerfully interacting. And interestingly, there's an emotional aspect with all the organs and glands, and so the interesting thing is that with the adrenals, the motion with the kidney is fear, so when somebody has extreme fear, guess what gets triggered? The adrenal glands. And so there is this big relationship. Now, next in line from the kidney, of course, is the liver energetically, and the liver's big related gland is thyroid. And of course, the liver is heavily involved in synthesizing raw material for the thyroid to make thyroxine in the form of T4, and then the T4 has to be converted, and the liver is a big player in the conversion of T4 to T3. The liver being very upset can affect thyroid function. And if the thyroid is being affected, then a lot of other things in the body that relate to the thyroid are affected. So here you get, again, what I mentioned earlier, you get the chain reaction. So then from the liver, we go to the heart. And so what is affected by heart? The testes or ovaries, depending on male or female. And so when there are disturbances, for example, of the ovaries, or they're excised in surgery, it affects the function of the heart, and vice versa. If you have a bad heart problem, it's going to affect the function of those endocrine glands. Then from heart, you go to spleen, and spleen, the major gland related to the spleen is the pancreas. Now, many people think of the pancreas as an organ, but basically it's a giant gland, and interestingly, it is both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland in the sense that it produces two hormones. One is called insulin and the other is called glycagon, which both have to do with the movement of sugar and storage of sugar and release of sugar and so forth in the body. And of course the insulin is the mover of sugar into the cells to be burned up in the mitochondria to produce energy. So all these things, as I say, it reminds me of this old kids' poem they used to have many years ago. This is the house that Jack built. This is the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. This is the rat that ate the malt that lay in the house Jack built. This is the cat that killed the rat that ate the malt that lay in the house. It goes on and on and on. But there's all these relationships, and each affecting the other. So all of these glands, all these organs work in harmony to help the body to work in a way that brings it all together in a balanced way. And that if it gets out of balance, can move it back into balance again. And of course, many, many years ago, that concept came about called homeostasis. And so that's what these major glands are involved in, is the homeostasis of the body. And it's interesting that at some point it goes all the way back to a structure in the brain referred to as the hypothalamus, meaning below the thalamus, and the thalamus is the controller of all the automatic systems in the body that we don't have to think about, and they still get carried out. And the hypothalamus is the sensor of the blood, determining hormone levels of all sorts, and actually sends messages to the other glands to release or to hold off releasing certain hormones. And these hormones, as I say, are messengers that make everything work. There are some other tissues that we would not consider normally a gland, but they do create certain messengers or hormones, such as the heart produces neuropeptides and what we call neurotransmitters. And we would not expect that from the heart unless you knew that, as I've mentioned before, that the heart is kind of like a second brain in the body, that it actually works in conjunction with the brain in a two-way system to regulate the systems of the body cycle-wise and so forth. And it helps with the neurological balance by producing a lot of these neurotransmitter hormones. Say the neurotransmitters are also, in my mind, a type of hormone, except that we always think of those related to the brain nervous system. And so we kind of group them together separately and call those neurotransmitters, which means that they carry messages in the brain nervous system. So that's not what is normally referred to as part of the endocrine system. Now the kidneys also produce a couple of hormones. One is erythropoietin, which is a signal that we need more red blood cells. And so and it also produces one has to do with blood pressure, because if the body senses, the kidneys sense that the pressure is dropping, which could indicate a loss of blood, it sends a message to speed up or contract the arteries to increase blood pressure and to make it less likely that you're going to leak out blood. And that could be why the blood pressure is dropping. So if you had plaque, for example, blocking the artery going into the kidney would be sensing a problem with pressure and therefore would be sending a message to build up the pressure. So now hypertension could develop in the whole body because there's a problem that's interfering with the blood circulation in the renal artery. So it's just, I'm just giving you this to give you an example of how everything tends to work together. So we're going to look primarily just at the endocrine system, and at this point, and even fat cells, I guess, which is, we wouldn't consider a gland per se, they also can issue hormones that affect the way body functions. So there's all this communication going on, and the purpose of all of it is to keep everything in balance, or homeostasis. So when something comes along and bang, affects you in some way, and throws you off stride or out of balance, then all these systems start readjusting to ultimately bring it back into balance again, to get us back to this homeostatic basis. So temporarily we may go into a chaotic state, but as the body rebalances itself, it brings us all back into a more balanced state again, and everything calms down and everything levels off. Now that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way we're built to cope with our environment and, of course, the universe, depending on how far away from the Earth we might get at some time. So the hormonal systems, as I say, or system of all these hormones, that goes out into the body and is sending messages or stop things to make everything keep as balanced as possible. And they're all very automatic. Fortunately, we don't have to sit and think about all this. I mean, think of what it would be like if we had to be aware of every gland in our body and every process that was going on in our body, and we had to constantly be decided, well, do we need more thyroxine? Do we need more adrenaline? Do we need more insulin? We would be occupied full-time just trying, I say trying because I don't think we could keep up with it, keep everything in some relatively balanced state. Well, we have that whole set of automatic processes that are going on from the thalamus, as I say, which is the major, what they call vegetative system of the body that does everything automatically. And we have the hypothalamus, which is situated slightly below the thalamus, which interconnects with the, quote, endocrine system, the hormones, and that keeps everything in balance. That's part of that regulating system to keep everything going. Now it's interesting because within the head, we have three major ones that are considered part of the endocrine system. And that is the hypothalamus, the pineal, and the pituitary. Those three and the head are involved in regulation heavily. In other words, not only we have the brain in the head, but we have these regulator glands and brain structure that regulate, sense what's going on, and send out messages through all the rest of the endocrine system. As again, I'm using system because that's the way it's used, to all these endocrine glands to keep everything in harmony. Day and night. See, the pineal is somewhat involved with the sleep cycle. The hypothalamus is measuring all the different hormones in the blood, and it is producing, in some cases, some hormones that are sent over to the pituitary and held there, and then when needed it sends another messenger hormone over and says release some of this into the body. It's needed. You know, like release antidiuretic hormone into the body because we're low on water. We don't want to dump it all out through the kidneys. So we send out that message, but it's, as I say, all done automatically. We don't have to think about it. In fact, I'm sure that we couldn't carry on everyday functions if we had to try to think about all these things and make them all work together. So we have the hypothalamus, we have, which is actually a type of brain tissue, but as I say, it produces a couple of hormones itself, which then are stored at the pituitary, and then it sends over a signal when that needs to be released. And so the pituitary basically is divided into two major, anterior and posterior. Another name out of the Latin for the pituitary is the hypophysis, and another name for the pineal is the hypophysis. The hypophysis and the hypophysis. And those are working to, as a cluster, those three, and they're all interconnected because the pineal connects to the hypothalamus as well as the pituitary. They're interconnected and they all are working together, but the hypothalamus is like a microprocessor in your computer. It's sensing what's going on. It has a lot to do with the water levels of the body. It has a lot to do with the heat in the body, the sleep cycles, the consciousness, healing, energy production, taking care of emergencies, you know, like immediately sending a message to the adrenals to release a lot of adrenaline to rub up your body so you can fight or run like crazy, and so forth. All those things are being done automatically, and all this information coming in through the senses get filtered through so that if there is an emergency, the hypothalamus is immediately sets in motion a whole group of things, and sometimes that's referred to as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And again, this is the separations done by medicine. It's all an intricate system, all wired together, and it's all done automatically unless we in some way interfere. Now, if we go in with a scalpel and we snip some of the things in the body, many times we disrupt things that we might stay alive, but we may never function quite as well after that. And so it's interesting that there's three of those in the head, the pineal, hypothalamus, and pituitary. There's three in the upper neck, chest area, which is the thyroid, parathyroid, and thymus, having to do with energy production in the body. The thyroid, the parathyroid, thyroid together have to do with regulation of the calcium in the blood and in the bone, and the thymus having to do with activation of the T cells, which are a major player in the immune system. So those are all located physically in those vicinities. Then down in the abdominal area all the way down to the pelvic area, we have the adrenals, the pancreas, and the gonads, which are either ovaries or testes, depending on the sex of the person. So that's what we tend to call the endocrine system, although it's not separated, as a separate little system over here that we can play with it and we can put in, take out things, and no problem. It is a problem. It's always going to be a problem. So that gives you a kind of a general picture of the hormonal system. And in particular the endocrine, because it's not all the hormones, but that's the ones that we always think of. And when you study anatomy and physiology, you will have this group separated out as the endocrine system. But they all interact with each other. They're just like, as I say, parathyroid, thyroid are playing back and forth with the calcium as to whether it's in the bone or whether it's in the blood. And we need it both places, which also points out the fallacy of sometimes the blood being able to tell you a whole lot, because calcium is needed for a lot of nervous system function and circulatory function. And it's also needed to, of course, stop bleeding, because it's part of the clotting system. So it's extremely important that there be a certain amount of calcium in the blood. In fact, on the day-to-day survival basis, it's more important in the blood than in the bone. Now, of course, if your bones fall apart and you fall over, you've got another problem. But at the same time, if the body has to make a choice of having it in the blood or having it in the bone, it's going to rob it from the bone and put it in the blood, because it's more important to survival. Now, that's why, of course, if you run a blood test and you look at the blood and say, well, the calcium's fine, and then you do an image of the bone and it looks like Swiss cheese, well, the body's pulling all that calcium from the bone to keep it up in the blood, because you're deficient in calcium, and therefore your body can't work right, and it cannot deal with everyday life and emergencies if it doesn't have it available in the blood. And so all those decisions, again, are made at a deeper level, and that you don't have to think about, but they're all working on your behalf. And so all these interplay with each other. You know, it's like the pancreas. When you have a meal that has sugars in it, the insulin is released because the pancreas senses the blood, and the hypothalamus senses, and it tells the pancreas, okay, release insulin, and insulin is going to be a carrier to carry sugar into the cells so you can make energy from it. So now, if everything is working right, that's what's going to happen. If you have eaten an excess amount of sugar, well, there's a function of the liver that's going to pull that sugar out and store it up, and it converts it to, instead of glucose, it goes to another molecule called glycogen. Okay, so it's held in the liver as glycogen until the blood sugar starts to drop, because now the food is consumed and the sugar has been pulled from the blood either into the cells or into the liver, and so there's still a certain amount circulating there. But if that starts to get used up and it starts to drop, guess what? The sensors pick up, blood sugar going low, don't have enough to build energy, so a message goes to the pancreas. Now we need to get the sugar back in the blood that's being stored in the liver. So what does it do? It releases a hormone messenger called glycagon, which goes into the blood, goes to the liver and says, hey, take that glycogen and convert it back to sugar and put it back in the blood if needed. And so that's, of course, the big mechanism that's disturbed in type 2 diabetes, is that the sugar is not being stored in the liver properly and being released back into the blood as it should be. It builds up in the blood too high, and then the body either has to convert it to fat or keep too much of it in the blood if it can't get it all converted, and now you got another big problem. So when it's working right, everything is fine. When it's not, we got big trouble. So everything is, as I'm wanting you to understand, it all interplays with each other. Now, when we go in and we do things by inserting into our body something that disrupts these things, guess what? The body starts not working so well anymore. Or if there's a big trauma, if there's a major trauma to the system, or a big emotional shock, all of these things have some effect in the body system, and the body responds to that if it's able to respond, meaning if we haven't impaired it so badly it can't do that. And as I say, with medicine, it's kind of, well, you know, we don't need this. If we can stay alive, we can cut out the gallbladder, we can cut out the appendix, the tonsils, the spleen. There's a pile of things we can cut out. We can cut out half the bowel. We can cut out half the stomach. We can do all these things, and we can still stay alive. And it's true. In many cases, we do stay alive. We just never function the same after that, that's all. And so all these hormones are flying all over the body. And as I say, the hormone system is referred to as the ductless gland system, the endocrine is. And, you know, if you go on the internet, you can find all kind of good stuff on there. And so you find out about the endocrine system, and you'll find out about a couple others that you don't hear much about, called the paracrine and the autocrine systems. And we're not even going to get into those at this point, but paracrine is when only local cells surrounding a particular cell are influenced by a release of information or a message. And the autocrine is within the cell itself. It releases certain things that signal other things within the cell, so that's called the autocrine. And you know, they're all important to understand if you just want to know how everything works, but as far as you being able to do anything with those, not too much unless you change your mind to a healthy mind state, and you could, in a sense, influence them by that. But this, the basic definition of the endocrine system is that they're ductless glands that produce and release hormones to the blood through diffusion. Endocrine glands may be strictly endocrine, such as the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pineal, and thymus, or they may be organs that have hormone production as one of their many functions, such as the pancreas, gonads, hypothalamus, and others. So, as I mentioned, the hypothalamus both produces certain hormones, and it also, at the same time, sends the messages via other hormones. So it's interesting. They can have dual functions, and I mentioned about the kidneys and the heart doing other things, and the fat cells also doing other things too. So it's never clear cut. I guess that's the message I'm trying to get across. It's never that clear cut. There's always this interplay. Now, those hormones themselves that send all these messages throughout the body to keep everything working together, basically, they're made from either amino acids, like a particular amino acid could be a hormone in the body. It also could be a trigger in the brain, or a precursor to some of the neurotransmitters, which, as I say in my mind, are like hormones or messengers also. And so amino acids are important, so people who are deficient in amino acids would have trouble synthesizing hormones, and as we're going to find in the other part of this, the next broadcast, the enzymes in the body. And it's the enzymes that cause things to happen, and it's the hormones that sounds the messengers to make them happen. And so when we talk about the enzymes, you're going to see how it's all coming together. And so single amino acids can be one of the hormones. Groups or chains of amino acids forming something called a peptide can also be a messenger, and in some cases you'll see that's true, like insulin is a whole chain of amino acids that form what's called the insulin molecule, but it's a peptide. And a peptide is a chain of amino acids as compared to a protein, which is a massive chain of amino acids that form a three-dimensional configuration, and it's much more complex. And so, you know, when we digest, for example, we've talked about it before, when you take protein into your mouth, when it gets to the stomach, the first stage of protein digestion starts, and that is the release of hydrochloric acid and pepsin, which cleaves apart the major protein molecules into shorter chains of amino acids called peptides. And it's the peptides that move then into the small intestine, and the second stage of protein digestion takes place where the peptides are cleaved apart into individual amino acids. And so it's quite fascinating, that whole process, how it works. So anyhow, you have just single amino acids, you have peptides, and the third type, as a rule, is the fatty acid type or the steroid type. And that's the one that, sterols are the big controversy today. Everybody's talking about your cholesterol, because cholesterol is a sterol synthesized by the liver because it's a precursor of hormones, and it's a precursor of a lot of other functions in the body, much more than what people would think. And so anytime you force down the cholesterol when the body needs more of it because it's under stress or it's something going on that it has a lot of breakdown of tissue and needs to be repaired, if you impair the production of cholesterol or sterols, then you can't build these hormones as you should. So I'm kind of interweaving this all together so you get the idea that hormones are not something to be played with. I know I studied with a MD who was also an ND, a DC, had a PhD in enzymology and advanced studies, and the hormone, or the immune system, all the immune functions. And see, we haven't even added that into this whole thing. But at any rate, it all works together, and that's the picture I'm trying to get, that when you go in and interfere with any of these, you disrupt a series of issues. And so, as I say, if you cut the cholesterol, then you interfere with a lot of the things that cholesterol can do. And if you put too much in, like if you take anabolic steroids, for example, you can cause a buildup of tissue, but you're going to create a lot of imbalance and damage. And years ago, there was I assume they're still around, a blood laboratory that was doing some very specialized blood tests. And so they actually suddenly started noting that some young men, about 18, 19, 20, 21, in that range, suddenly were showing evidence of massive liver damage. And they were trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And why would somebody that young be showing already massive liver damage? And it ended up that they were taking anabolic steroids, hormones, to try to build up big muscle. They didn't realize what the stress it was putting on the liver to do that, to try to process out all these steroids. Hormones are very complex, and the liver is involved in, as I said earlier, making the precursors, and it's also involved in breaking them down once they're released. So they were putting tremendous stress on the body trying to deal with all these very complex molecules of steroids and get rid of them because they were putting in massive amounts in their body. So anyhow, I think we've come to a point that we can probably kind of wind down on the hormones, but we understand that those are all these messages that are going back and forth, keeping everything working right in the body. And at any time you come along and you disrupt any one of those, you're going to cause a lot of repercussions. You're going to pay a price for it, and people don't even give an idea. I mean, to go to the doctor and get a pill that's going to disrupt this or that, think nothing of it. But down the road, gee, then suddenly one day they find out they've got this major problem. How did that happen? Well, I guess you got a new problem. That's what they're told by doctors. And in many cases, the doctors may not know because they were taught these are all systems, and they're all separate. So you can mess up with this one, but it won't affect here, which is not true. So I hope I've given you enough to wrestle with today. We've already exhausted our time. It was nice being with you again, and we'll continue with the enzymes next time as how this all interplays, and I hope you find it as exciting and fascinating as I have to understand how the body really works. So don't forget to go to our webcast website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and we in the process I've got some new pages we want to add, so be looking for those. I'm always looking at new information, new ways of finding out how the body is functioning, and to be able to monitor, are we improving it and getting it better? The therapies we use are the least intrusive and the most corrective that I can find, as opposed to going in and blocking, meaning overstimulating or blocking functions in the body. We want to put the right things in to help the body function the way it wants to function. It was nice being with you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you in our next broadcast. And in the meantime, be healthy.